Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by IRI Consultants. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Companies today strive for a diverse workforce. And in this episode, we're going to be exploring why opening the door to neurodiverse workers can not only increase staffing levels, but also bring valuable new ways of thinking and problem solving to your organization, ways that can give your company a competitive edge. Today, I'm joined by Susanne Bruyère. Susanne is a professor of disability studies and the director of the Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability at the Cornell University Industrial and Labor Relations School. She's also the co-editor of a new book titled Neurodiversity in the Workplace: Issues, Interests, and Opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us here on Project HR, Susanne.
Thank you for the opportunity. I very much am looking forward to our conversation.
So, Susanne, I feel like the term neurodiversity is often misunderstood. What does it mean to be neurodiverse?
Well, this term is used increasingly, and it describes the natural way that people think, learn, and take and look at the world, perceive the world, as well as interact and process information differently. Neurodiversity, that term describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in lots of different ways, and that we like to think there's no really right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and that these differences are a normal part of the natural way of that we differently see the world. Now, I will say there are an umbrella list of conditions that fall under this neurodiversity term. Autism is one of them, and we're probably going to speak mostly about that, but it's also attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and certain mental health conditions like PTSD and depression can also be included. I'd like to say right up front, I'm also going to use the term neurodivergent, and I'm using that term because lots of neurodiverse people think in using that term neurodiversity, we're not acknowledging the fact that we're all neurodiverse, and that we're really talking about people who think differently, neurodivergently. So you'll hear me use that term too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I touched on this in the open, but let's address how a neurodiverse workforce can be really a competitive advantage for companies. I mean, what does a worker like this bring to the table that a neurotypical worker doesn't?
Well, you are absolutely right. We are seeing many more employers embracing affirmative hiring programs where they're actively searching out neurodivergent workers because they perceive that there are talents that we've largely underestimated in the past of focus, ability to see anomalies and patterns in data that may be very beneficial for certain jobs. And so particularly we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years, ardent interest among tech and tech-intensive companies in pursuing individuals with these characteristics because they see them as potentially advantageous in certain jobs.
So when I think typically of like DE&I efforts, I think we all kind of knee-jerk to race, gender, and even age. And to date, would you say that neurodiversity has kind of taken a backseat to these other factors?
Well, it has certainly been important for us to address the historical inequities that what we've seen in employment for women and for people of color. But indeed, people with disabilities more broadly, as well as neurodivergent individuals, have been latecomers in the diversity and inclusion conversation for sure. And that, despite the fact that all other minority groups have disability and neurodivergent representation among them, this is, not unique to one other population. It's represented in all of the different populations and minority groups.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's time that we include neurodiversity or neurodivergent individuals in this conversation about D&I.
So what typically has been the reaction to neurodiverse workers up till now? Have there been opportunities available in traditional corporate spaces?
Well, it has not been easy for people to get into the workforce, and the employment participation rates for neurodivergent individuals tells this story. There are significantly lower opportunities to participate in the workforce historically for them. For example, the employment rate of autistic individuals is 22%, and that's 2021 statistics of the U.S. Office of National Statistics. That's where that comes from. And even when autistic people are in the workplace, when they get in the workforce, many are in positions where they're underemployed, given their education levels and abilities. So it has not been equal playing field for autistic individuals historically.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that the fact that the term kind of deals with a spectrum of individuals, the wide range of capabilities, is that kind of deterred businesses from exploring the potential of this segment of job candidates? Like you said, they're often underemployed. What's standing in our way?
Well, I think that many employers have historically not felt adequately equipped to deal with people with disabilities of all kinds, including neurodivergent individuals. And indeed, labels like the one you're suggesting, spectrum, these labels can be very off-putting and needlessly create stereotypes and stigmas that infuse a fear into the workplace and supervisors that they may not be able to adequately address any support needs that people have, if they even have them. But I have to say, often that's an unrealistic fear, and really a fear that's not necessary. For example, this accommodation concern, which we've historically thought was an impediment. We know from national survey data that 95% of people who ask for accommodations in the workplace are not people with disabilities. So we're accommodating all the time. And if we could just convey to employers that, look, they're doing this, they're going to be much more equipped to be able to engage and support and be successful with people of difference, like neurodivergent people that they've kept out of the workplace in the past, it would really move this needle farther than it has in the past.
So, thinking about your research, if we shine the light, turn it around, and shine it on the folks who have found a place in the workplace, those neurodiverse people who have found jobs, what have their experiences traditionally been like?
I think that, like for many of us, it has been mixed. Certainly, neurodivergent individuals have been successful in getting jobs, and many of them have thrived being who they are in their respective work settings. They've done really well. But there are certainly situations where people share with us where they have had to hide their neurodivergent identity out of fear of some kind of negative repercussions, and therefore might not have gotten needed supports in the form of accommodations for some kind that they might need to be more successful in their workplaces. Or maybe they did come forward and they've shared with us that when they did disclose, they experienced either discrimination or some kind of ridicule or harassment. So it makes people fearful of being able to come forward, say who they really are and the talents they bring to the table, and get accommodations they might need that will help them to be maximally successful.
All right, Suzanne, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now. But when we return, I want to talk about the book and how we can make our workplaces more appealing to neurodiverse workers. Stay with us.
In today's labor market, it is becoming more difficult to attract and retain top talent. The skills gap is widening, so businesses are struggling to find qualified workers. Leaders need training programs to help them improve their leadership skills so they can be better equipped to manage change, engage employees, and lead their companies into the future. IRI Consultants Lead Academy offers leadership development courses for managers and executives in various formats, including live classroom sessions, virtual classrooms, and on-demand e-learning modules. IRI's courses focus on the essential knowledge needed for effective leaders across all industries and levels of management. Learn how you can enhance your team's leadership capabilities with Lead Academy courses today. Visit us to learn more at bit.ly/leadercourses.
I'm back now with Susanne Bruyère, co-editor of a new book titled Neurodiversity in the Workplace: Issues, Interests, and Opportunities. Now, Suzanne, you and Adrienne Coella edited this new book. Would you tell me more about this collection and how it came to be?
Sure. Well, we have an individual book in a much larger collection that has been in place. It was actually launched in 1983, and by the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. It's called the Frontiers of Research in IO Psychology, and it was designed as a series to make scientific contributions to the IO field. And so it's been an effort since that time to publish books that were seen as cutting edge theory and research that were meant to inform the practice of IO psychology and related organizational science disciplines. So the goal of the series is to inform and stimulate these IO members, students, practitioners, and researchers to think about these topics, research them, and integrate them into their educational efforts for IO psychology students of the future.
Now, you and Adrienne wrote the first chapter in the collection, and in it, you set up the 2 reasons why neurodiversity in the workplace merits our attention in this moment. Can you share those reasons?
Sure. We saw this as a largely untapped talent pool, and some of the disparities in employment that we shared with you were compelling reasons to make people in the industrial organizational field aware about how if we change some of the workplace policies and practices, we could more effectively include neurodiverse individuals. Also, little research had been done in this area in IO psychology to date. And so we thought if we could pull together what we did know and also identify what we don't know and where there are gaps, that hopefully we could encourage people to do more research in this area and help us to identify effective practices that would mean that we were much more successful than we have been historically in getting people into the workplace and helping them thrive.
So, who do you think is the ideal audience for your book?
Well, we, of course, wrote the book targeting those who would most likely pick up the PsyOp Frontiers of Research series, and that's IO psychologists. It was our hope it would encourage people and inform them to do future research and add to our knowledge base about good practices in the workplace. But we also really believe that the information provided can be useful to a much broader audience. We see workplace professionals like human resource professionals, equal employment opportunity professionals, labor relation professionals, the target audience of your podcast series,
for sure,
as potential audiences. But also, we're hoping that employers, supervisors, as well as autistic individuals would take a look at this and understand what they can do as individuals who are supporting people or as self-advocates, as for an autistic individual, understand what good practice is and how to ask for what will be helpful to them. We hope it'll be broadly used.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the contributors to this collection. What are some of your favorites?
Well, we purposely, I think each offers something quite unique. There's a couple dozen different contributors here, and we pick them because of their interest or expertise in neurodiversity, but also workplace practice more generally. So we have organizational behavior, management, law, special education, rehab counseling. We tried to step beyond just compliance with what people have to do because of the law, but also look at what can people do to build more inclusive climates. And we like the fact that some of our authors bring in special education, that literature, which is uncommon in IO psychology, but also people who are themselves identify as neurodivergent, who are being practitioners and consultants to employers and can bring us that perspective. So we like the whole array, and we think it fits together like a mosaic of information that builds a pretty comprehensive look at what good practice should be across the whole employment process.
Interesting. So how did you select the topics for this volume? There had to be a wealth of information out there. How did you choose?
Well, we thought about where are all the places in the employment process where people could get held up in successfully getting in there. So we wanted to look from recruitment and hiring all the way through career development and retention, but also look at, people can get into the workplace if they make it that far and then not be included. So we wanted to also talk about what are good practices that help with effective supervision, mentoring, organizational leadership, and effective accommodations. So you'll see across the 13 chapters a pretty comprehensive look that should cover almost every facet, if not every facet, of what it would be good workplace practice.
Yeah, Susanne, that's fascinating. I have to take another quick break right now. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Susanne Bruyère, co-editor of a new book titled Neurodiversity in the Workplace: Issues, Interests, and Opportunities. We're back. Now, the issues addressed in the book make it clear that to take full advantage of what this population can bring to a workplace might require a comprehensive change within your organization, starting with recruitment. Tell me a little bit about how the very first interaction with a company might pose challenges for a neurodiverse candidate.
Well, you're absolutely right to start with the question about recruitment. Inclusion needs to start with recruitment, and recruitment can be improved by letting people know that they're actually desired as candidates in the application process. And this should occur in how it's conveyed in the organization's online recruiting materials. We do research with job seekers and we've asked them about what they see in these pages that are attracted to them. And if they see statements from CEOs that say that this is a part of the strategic business of the organization, or they see targeted hiring or internship programs, they're much more likely to apply. So how you present yourself as an organization, as a company on your website speaks volumes to people as to whether or not they're wanted. That's a great place to start where recruitment is concerned.
Yeah, and we talk a lot on this podcast about your employer brand and making sure that those statements are clear and made online. So those are really good suggestions. But once a hire is made, what changes need to be made within the workplace to be more inclusive to those neurodiverse workers?
Another good question, because people can get in there and then get stalled. And I would say many of the good practices that we've encouraged organizations for all workers in the past are also good for recruits who are neurodivergent or autistic. And that can be things like, having really clear job descriptions, job expectations, but also supportive supervisors who provide regular check-ins with their employees and regular performance feedback. And also ask people what they're interested in and what they feel they can do well, where they want their longer term goals to be, and supporting them to acquire those new skills. Don't presume that because a person is autistic or neurodivergent that they don't have aspirations for improving and moving on. And then really important, workplace culture, looking at ways that people can feel more included over time. And we often suggest employee resource groups or business groups that are targeting neurodivergent individuals and their allies as one place that you can begin to help build a supportive culture.
For sure. Now, in one of the latter chapters of the book, one of the contributors discusses the difference between the medical model or disability and the social model of disability. I think that's a really critical distinction. I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, it really is. The medical model has historically been viewed people with disabilities, including, autism or neurodivergence, as people who would have a diagnosis, they have a label, there's something that needs to be fixed or changed to make them typical or normal. And in the social model, we are fortunately being moved away from that historical model of diagnosis and fix people to one where we look at how can we help people thrive? How can we create inclusive environments of all kinds? But here we're focused on the workplace where people get the supports they need to be successful. So it's an entirely different vantage point, and I think it's one that everyone would benefit from, all employees.
All right, well, I'm going to ask a little bit of a controversial question with that in mind. What are your thoughts on affirmative hiring programs for neurodiverse workers?
Well, I think we've seen the strengths and weaknesses of other affirmative hiring programs for targeted populations like women and racial ethnic minorities. There are certainly advantages to them. They've helped us to get people into the workplace who otherwise were not being given an opportunity to get into the workplace and to thrive. So looking at equity for this population is also really important. Individuals tell us they've been stopped at the front door often and not gotten an opportunity unless these specific portals were created where recruiters have been educated, people have been given an opportunity to show what they can do, not have to tell what they can do, which is sometimes difficult for an autistic person. But that said, we need to be giving people different options. Some people will choose not to disclose and want to go through regular portals. And to make sure that they are successful over time, we need to be building more neurodiverse diversity inclusive workplaces as a whole. Think about how we design our workspaces, how we educate our supervisors about inclusion and include neurodiversity and autism when we talk about what inclusion is all about.
And I love that idea of intentionality behind this, that it's not necessarily, we're going to fill quotas of a certain number of people who are neurodiverse, but we're going to educate our own workforce, our recruiters and our supervisors. I love that idea. So what do you hope that readers will take away from the book?
Well, I think you just articulated it really well. I think we see this population as critically important. It is the prevalence rate is growing. We're going to be seeing more people like this who are in the workforce, and more people who are already in the workforce self-identifying and coming forward and saying what they need. So we need to prepare for that. And we think that we'll call this population the canary in the coal mine. We think that this is a great litmus to say it's time to build more generically inclusive workplaces. And I think if we think of neurodiversity as an area where we can create universal design, make more user-friendly interview processes, it's going to benefit everybody. So I'm really hoping people will think about how they can generalize beyond this population. Certainly think about this population, that's what we're focused on, but also how can we build more generically inclusive workplaces where folks will thrive and not have to be seen as special when we make it accessible to them.
That's brilliant. If our listeners want to find out more about you or your book, where can we go?
Well, you can go to the Cornell University Yang-Tan Institute website. We have tons of information about our work there. I'm on LinkedIn, and the book itself is available both in paperback and in hard copy from Hard Copy Taylor and Francis and Routledge Books for the paperback. I hope that people will look for it and buy it and find it useful.
I want to remind everyone that we have taken notes and listened back to the podcast, and you will find a link to purchase Neurodiversity in the Workplace included in this episode's companion guide. Be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Susanne, it is time for our lightning round questions, and these are questions I ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about unlocking inclusive workplaces for neurodiverse people. In your opinion, Susanne, which is more valuable for leaders to employ in this effort? Understanding, accommodation, or both?
Well, I think attitude is really the most important thing for the organization as a whole and for individuals within that workplace. So in some ways, it really has to be both. It's both a willingness to listen and to understand as best as you can what the person needs, which is understanding what the person needs to be successful, but make an effort then to provide that support. So it really does have to be both.
I love that. What's the best book that you've read recently?
Oh, goodness. I've been reading a couple this summer. I'll tell you about both of them. One is by Gary Bowles. And Gary was a person he's seen as a futurist, and we've used him to help facilitate a future of work with a focus on technology and disability a few years back. And he just put a book out called The Next Rules of Work. And the subtitle is The Mindset, Skill Set, and Tool Set to Lead Your Organization Through Uncertainty. So I loved it. I think it really speaks to how when we are in a time of crisis, which we certainly have been the last 2.5 years, how we need to think differently, how we construct physical workplaces, but also work teams and empower people to be able to contribute more effectively to the organization and how it's designed. I loved it. I thought it was really timely. The other book I'm reading is, I'm a brand new grandparent, and it's called Parenting with Presence. And I think the two really parallel in that they both speak to the importance of looking at individuals as individuals and more about reinforcing who they are rather than what they do. And I think that messaging parallels exactly what we've been talking about today.
Interesting. All right, next question. What's your favorite thing about the work that you do?
Oh gosh, I think it's working with different populations, and they each contribute something different. I think I do a lot of professional development, online training for practicing workplace professionals, and I think it just makes me so happy when they say they are excited about workplace inclusion now. They haven't thought about it before, and they're going to bring it into their workplace. And I think, those are the practicing professionals. We in the ILR school, where our institute is housed, we're in the school, a school for work. And I think what makes me excited there is our students are workplace professionals for the future, and I seeing them get excited about taking this forward. But many of them are willingly in these courses, which is with a disability focus, also talking about their own identity and feeling empowered to be their own best self advocates. I think having people like that in the workplace of the future is going to move the needle a lot faster. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, incredibly impactful. All right, next question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think to listen. It's as simple as that. Listening to people, to what they need. Most people really know what they need to be successful, but we aren't listening to them enough. And I think it's really important to make successful workplaces. We need to listen to people, to what they need to be able to be at their best. And that would change things immensely if we did that effectively.
Very nice. All right, last question. Who or what inspires you?
I've alluded to that. I think our students at Cornell inspire me. They are really the hope for the future, to build a more inclusive workplace, but also a more inclusive, kind, and caring communities and societies as a whole. And that is something that we need very much right now. So I look to them to help us make that successful.
Susanne, it has been a true pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
I also want to thank everyone listening. Don't forget that we took great notes on this episode for you. You can grab those notes for free at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you're ready for your Project HR debut, our team is always looking for outstanding guests. Let us know about your expertise at projecthr@iriconsultants.com. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to Project HR. A new episode posts every Thursday. Finally, drop me a line, leave us a review, or give the show a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's all for this week's episode of Project HR. Let's make it a great day at work.